I've trawled the internet and found some common questions from the general public about
Okay.
toxins and about toxicology.
See what
So,
we can do.
yeah, some quick fire questions. Are Tide Pods and laundry detergent bad for your health?
If you eat them,
Yeah.
yes.
Yeah. What about if you don't eat them?
Well, I mean, it's just a new gimmicky way to get products into your laundry. I don't see it being a problem. It's just the big problem with them is the kids that eat them. So make the packages more childproof.
Yeah, put a lock on it. Yeah. Second question. Venom versus poison. What's the difference?
Venom versus a poison. So it's really in the delivery method. So a venom is gets injected into your body versus poison's passive intake. So like snake, like if you get bit by a snake, that's venomous. If you drink a shot of venom, then that's poisonous.
So it's not necessarily there's not necessarily a chemical difference. It's the way it's implanted into your body.
Right. It's really, yeah, how does it get into your body? I mean, both are, bad. I mean, the effects are bad, but, really when you think about something as venomous, it comes from the animal when it gets injected in your body.
Yeah. Third question. Are color additives and synthetic dyes safe?
Oh, you used quotes with that? Um, there's a lot of controversy about that right now. So what I will say is that a lot of the colors that we get can be extracted from plants. And when you extract that, you extract a whole bunch of other stuff in there that you might put into your smoothie. I don't know. But a synthetic color additive is the same thing as what you want. It's just made synthetically so that you don't have all of that other stuff in it. So I think that you know the dose makes the poison always. So many of these studies that have been, is it safe or not? Um, it's a political thing because, again, sometimes, yes, maybe those things could cause cancer if you ate 5,000 packets of whatever that colorant is every day for the rest of your life. So, in a general standpoint, I don't think that, the ones that are on the market, I believe are safe and well used. And again, food and beverage regulations regulate and say, you can use this amount for this particular purpose in this scenario. They don't just say, throw it in there, Frank. They're very specific. So if you change that use scenario, you've got to demonstrate that it's appropriate and necessary. So there's a lot of regulations out there to help you, and or that there's a lot of regulations out there to prove their safe use at the formulation, the manufacturing process for that intended use at that concentration. So I don't have a problem with colors and additives like that.
Is dosage always um, the thing that defines whether it's actually toxic for you? So are there some chemicals that even if you had a tiny dosage, it would still be just as bad for you if you had more? So is it like if you have a tiny amount, are there some chemicals that if you have a tiny amount can still have the same impact as if you had 10 times more than that?
Yeah, yeah, definitely. Botulism toxin, that, takes a very, 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 very small amount to kill you. And if that's the end point, you're looking at death, near death, so no, absolutely, the dose makes the poison. If you are sitting next to a snake, a venomous snake, a cobra, okay, and it's in a glass box, that is very hazardous. Your exposure is zero, your risk is zero. But if you are cohabitating, then that risk of exposure is great. So it's all about, you can take 2 Tylenol and have for a headache. But if you take 50 Tylenol, you're going to need a new liver. So, it's all about the dose.
Yeah. Next question. Is it true that sugar can neutralize cyanide?
I don't know. I mean, the problem with cyanide is that when it gets into your body, it causes everywhere that needs oxygen to kind of starve. Right. So cyanide, because your brain and your heart need the most oxygen, when it gets there, it shuts it down, and then you die. I really, it acts so fast. I really can't see sugar making a difference.
Yeah. How fast does it act? Is it like rapid, like couple seconds, couple minutes?
Yeah, depending on the
Wow.
dose. Yep.
Yeah. And where is it synthetically made or is it a naturally produced kind
Well,
of?
originally was a natural product, and then they figured out how to make it. So, yeah, great scientist.
Yeah. Do you know what it was found in naturally, originally?
So originally, cyanide, you can find it in like seeds, like apple seeds, pit seeds, like peaches and plums and such. There's a bit of cyanide in those seeds. So you could pull it all together and, it's the magic of television, make enough to have something that could kill you. Yes, but don't do that. I disavow any use of a concentrating agent to poison your roommates with cyanide. Thank you.
Agreed. Next question. How does our body expel toxins and bad chemicals? You did mention it briefly earlier, a little bit. Yeah.
Yeah. So there's a bunch of ways. Again, your body is trying to make it more water soluble so that it will leave. So, for example, you've been out drinking rum all night and you breathe into a breathalyzer, and they can tell that you've been drinking because you can expel alcohol through your breath. So, again, it's feces, it is your kidneys. And again, anytime like your sweat, we've all had those kind of, oh, you smell like you were drinking last night, and you know, it exits through your pores.
Yeah. I didn't actually realize that it could exit through breathing, but it makes sense with the
Oh yeah.
breathalyzer thing, doesn't it?
Oh yeah.
Is
So there is a when you breathe in and out, and you have a certain concentration of alcohol in your bloodstream, there is a conversion factor that says when you breathe in and out, the X amount is able to leave through through your breath, which is why they can say, "Oh, this is how." And then because they know what that level is, they equate that with a level of impairity of you being impaired to be able to do that. So that's why breathalyzer works. But that's also why if you get arrested for drinking and you pee into a cup to see if you've been drinking, they can't tell how long you've been drinking or whatever, because that's just a reservoir of pee. So, so that's why it's a little different. The problem with something like cannabis is they don't know what that mathematical equation is. So they don't have an idea of what that relationship is between your lungs and blood level with what you breathe out, and or what does that mean in terms of being impaired from a cannabis standpoint. So that's why, it's one of the things about it's tough with that, because they haven't done enough research to say if you have this much cannabis in your breath, this means you are X impaired.
would they be able to do like a quick blood test, or does it not work like that for cannabis? And is that unethical?
Yes, they can do a blood test, but they don't know, again, how does that equate with you being impaired. They can just say yes or no. Because again, they can do a blood test for alcohol and say, oh, you had this much blood alcohol level. That equates to this kind of impairment.
Yeah. And will they be able to figure that out eventually, or is it just very hard with cannabis?
Well, it's hard when it's not truly legal. And it's hard when you have so many different forms of cannabis. Well, so many different levels of the THC and the other CBD oils in there. And we don't know what all of those other oils do and how they can impair.
Oh, okay. Next question. If a product doesn't have poison on the label, is it safe?
Dose makes the poison. So, alcohol, bottle alcohol doesn't say it's a poison, but if you have 400, it's a poison. So, you know, they usually try to, look at foreseeable use of a substance. So I, still would follow the instructions.
Yeah. Does natural or organic automatically mean non-toxic?
Oh, hemlock, I mean, hemlock is a poison that you can get from a hemlock plant and you can die. That's pretty natural. Um, you walk through poison ivy, you're itchy. That's natural. So, absolutely, those are, natural and organic. Oh, yeah. Doesn't mean anything in terms of its safety.
Yeah. Um, should you make someone vomit if they swallow something poisonous?
It depends. So, are they awake or not? If they are not awake, do not make them vomit. If you know what they took, if they took something like bleach or some kind of acid, then going back up is going to make it even worse. So, general rule of thumb, if somebody has had a poison, call your 911 or whatever you use in around the world. Keep them conscious and try, if they throw up on their own, like turn them to their side, but absolutely, no. Don't give them anything. People are like, give them milk. It'll make it. No, don't give anything.
Yeah, just call the professionals.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. Do synthetic chemicals cause more cancer than natural ones?
Every chemical is every substance is a chemical. So, I mean, if I put, benzene I made on the bench top next to benzene that I got out of something else, it's still benzene. So, I don't think I can answer that very well.
Yeah. Can air fresheners disrupt hormones?
Depends what's in the air freshener.
What about like an average, like popular air freshener product?
Probably not, but you know, there are regulations about fragrances and how much you should be able to, what's permitted in some of those. So I would think that they're not putting a lot of hormone fresheners out, in your car.
Yeah. This one is like my curiosity is included in this and my ignorances as well. What are phthalates? Is that how you say it?
Phthalates, yeah, phthalates are substances that are often added into plastic products to make them more squishy. So, like a rubber ducky, squishy. And those have been found to cause problems with the endocrine system. And so, over the years, they have faded and removed these over time. But they tend to be out there. Um, they're persistent, so you can still find them in some products. But again, globally, they have been the use is much, much, much less.
Yeah, and branching off of that question, what are kind of some other products or chemicals or foods or drinks that can cause endocrine disruption, maybe like testosterone, like can potentially decrease testosterone or estrogen levels?
Oh, I don't know. I can't think of anything really off the top of my head. But again, the endocrine system is really super complicated, and there's a lot of what I would call redundancy. So, uh, and and also, females have testosterone, males have estrogen. So it's a complex play between the two to be able to have a functioning adult. So anything that really would affect your thyroid levels, I can't come up with anything off the top of my head, but I'm sure that that's something that they're looking for when they're trying to make a functional beverage, that it doesn't do that.
Yeah, hopefully. Are green cleaning products actually safer?
Again, it depends on who you ask. Um, you know, they there are labels for green products. Um, I've done some assessments on them. Um, Overall, I think you're just trading one thing for another, and a lot of it is perception. So I'm not sure of the standards for what makes something greener in terms is it less toxic? Does it degrade faster? Is it a lower concentration? I'm not sure of what the rules are, but um, I've found that overall, um, maybe there's some products that I will choose to be a greener quote unquote product, but again, I try not to overuse my products. I mean, but favorite thing that I use to clean spots in my laundry is the dishwashing detergent that's blue, for your dishes. That's the Rising of the Sun. I don't think I can just say its name. The Rising of the Sun product. That's really gentle and it works really great. So, no, personal choice. But a lot of that is a marketing ploy too. So just be careful on what you choose.
Yeah. And how much should we be using these cleaning products? Should it be every single time we want to clean, or is it sometimes better to use some like vinegar and water, for example?
I don't know. I mean, how clean do you want your house to be? But again, I mean, they use normal use scenarios when they pick these things out. So they'll say, in a normal use scenario, you will clean your windows 5 times a day, 5 times a month, or whatever. And this is what can get on your hands. And this is the skin absorption of these substances. And, so it all depends, really.
How and why did you become a toxicologist? Where did it all begin for you?
Oh, well, I went to university and I graduated with a degree in biology, biotechnology, and I didn't get into graduate school right away, actually. So I ended up working down the street at a laboratory that was run by DuPont. It was called Haskell Laboratory for Industrial Medicine and Toxicology. And I was like, well, it's a job for a year. It was a co-op type position. And I got there and I realized, wow, this toxicology stuff is pretty cool. So in the lab, we were looking at different ways to examine the potential for human exposure. So my particular project was looking at animals being exposed to a particular chemical to determine how much was actually deposited in the nasal cavity as the rats breathe. Because, fun fact, rats and mice can only breathe through their nose. So if you kind of measure what's going into their nose and out through their trachea, you can determine how much sits inside their nose. And in those days, which was the early 90s, we were doing a lot to try and understand using different computer programs. We were trying to model what went in the body, where did it go in the body, which compartments, and then how did it get out of your body? Because if we could understand what was happening in those particular compartments, we could start to substitute data that we knew for humans for those compartments. So honestly, nobody really cares if a rat gets cancer. What we care if a rat is a good model for a human. So I did this work in the laboratory of my mentor, Dr. Matt Bogdanfi. And after a couple of months, he says, well, what do you want to do with the rest of your life? I said, I want your job. And he said, okay, well, let's get you to graduate school. So I went to graduate school in Philadelphia, and I have a PhD in pharmacology and toxicology. And my entire career, up until most recently, has really focused on industrial chemicals. And although you may think of industrial chemicals as not being particularly relevant, there's a lot of industrial chemicals that in some way or another get into and used for pharmaceuticals or cosmetics or other healthcare products, or, even if you go into your local DIY store and get some spray paint. All of these contain industrial chemicals, and our job, as I tend to consider myself as an industrial or occupational toxicologist, is really to take a look at all of these things together and make sure that they're being used for their intended purpose, and you have data to support their intended use in commerce. So that's a very long way of saying I was lucky.
So in terms of animal testing, is it 100% necessary to do it on rats and mice? And how applicable are the findings from these studies on human health?
Well, it really depends. So you may remember that, you probably don't, but you're very young. So back when I was a little kid, we had saccharin. It was a sweetener, and just, everybody used it, and it was not a big deal, and it was a very powerful sweetener. And then, as it turns out, it was banned by the FDA because it's a carcinogen. Wow, yes, thank you, FDA, that's wonderful. But then they found out a few years later that the reason it is a carcinogen in animals is because it happens by a mechanism that is impossible for it to happen in humans. Rats had a special way they metabolized this substance, and it caused kidney damage and then eventually kidney cancer. So that's why the pink stuff, saccharin, also known as like sweet and low, that came back on the market because they realized, yeah, it's an animal carcinogen or rat carcinogen. It's not a human carcinogen. So I think that there has been a trend over the last 30, 40 years to reduce animal testing and come up with alternative models. And that has been wonderful and has been very useful. But there are just some things you just can't test in a human that is just unethical or it's too early. So, I mean, with the advances that we've seen in modern computing, with AI, with the combination of really good computer scientists with really good scientists and biologists and chemists, we've been able to develop a lot of computer simulations of what can happen, but a lot of that is still based on what happened in animals or what happens when we've looked at them in humans. So it's still necessary, although I believe the EU has put a moratorium on it in terms of they want to phase it out completely. The US as well. The EU did a really good job several years ago. There was a giant testing program that actually has fueled most of my career and allowed me to be paid. But this program called REACH, before you could do any vertebrate testing, you had to get approval to make sure that, hey, this testing is really necessary. So not only have we reduced the amount of testing, we have made sure that the testing is being done with the minimal amount of animals necessary to have statistical significance. So, I mean, I think we're all moving in the right direction, but there's just some things that we haven't found a good model for yet.
Mm. And speaking of the industrial chemicals and then there being in a lot of products, the chemicals tested before or after the products are sold to the market, are these tests happening after they're being put on the shelves?
Generally not. A lot of the cosmetic brands will say not tested on animals. Well, yeah, they haven't tested that final formulation on animals because in a lot of toxicology, what you can do is you can say, okay, if we know that A, B, and C don't interact with each other to make things worse, if they're all three you understand their mechanism, then you can do some math and combine them together based upon their percentages to determine if that effect is really, truly, what is the level of that. Irritation is a really good example. You've got maybe 3 or 4 irritants in a formulation, and individually at highly concentrated amounts, those may be true irritants. But at the levels that are in that particular cosmetic, it may not be from a single agent, not be actually an irritant. But if you added 4 little bits of 4 irritants, that might meet a threshold. So those were the days when you would take that final formulation and put it in a rabbit eye. But now they don't. They say, oh no, look, let's look at these combinations and see if we should classify this as an irritant or not. So there was a huge amount of pre-existing data that we as toxicologists and pharmacologists and drug development people rely on to help understand what's going to happen with these new models and these new products coming out.
And is that mainly using kind of AI and computer generated simulations almost nowadays, or is it still?
I mean, I guess you could call it AI to a certain extent. I mean, it's getting better. So when we take everything down to its simplest level, it's all everything is a chemical, right? In its very simplest form. And a lot of times that form will dictate its particular function. So, for example, if you have a substance which has a particular NCO group, free NCO group, which I don't expect anybody to know what that is, but I do, that actually prompts the immune system to become allergic to itself. So it's a sensitizer. So if you understand structurally what that is, and that piece of the molecule is able to result in, kind of tickling the immune system, then you can build computer programs that you could ask, hey, this substance has a free NCO group. Do we think it's going to be a sensitizer? And so they generally will use different training sets of data to build these models so that you have data to say, oh yeah, this, even though that this is a free NCO group, we think, no, because of where it is in the molecule, it's blocked, it's not going to have its thing. So in the traditional, like, ask GPT or ask another AI thing, is this going to cause cancer? Not exactly, but the models are really being able to grow with the amount of data that's available and become much smarter as we ask it different questions and we refine the models based on new things we learn.
Yeah. And there's clearly a benefit there should be a benefit to having these kind of chemicals in products. Could you tell me some common benefits in these, like, that are used in, like, common in everyday products? What are some of the benefits and reasons why these chemicals exist on our shelves?
So a lot of things are based upon preservatives. So we have some of the safest food supply in the world. And that's a lot of times because you will have certain preservatives that are added into food, or even linings for cans. Cosmetics have stabilizers. They have, there's a whole, depending on the product that we're talking about, some can be cleansers, some can be, disrupt surfactants. So, like, if you've ever taken, like, you've got a dish pan and it's full of grease and you put that one drop of cleaner and it spreads out, it breaks the surface tension. And so you end up having it be a good cleanser. So this idea that necessarily organic is good or chemical free, there's nothing that is chemical free, or I have a safer alternative. You might, but it's all, so much of it is driven by marketing and consumer demand for that kind of particular product.
Yeah. And a lot of toxicologists have criticized influencers for spreading kind of food safety myths. And why is there such a prevalence of toxin misinformation? And how do we counteract this misinformation?
Oh, it's tough. Um, One of the biggest pieces of misinformation out there that makes me very angry is around the whole vaccines cause autism. And the person that wrote that study lost their medical license, fabricated data, took money to do this research and to manipulate it. And I think that they should go to jail for murder, but that's just my own personal thing there. With the age of the internet, it is really hard to tell where information comes from. It looks like it's a good source, like the Jacob Watson-Howland podcast, the authoritative podcast. But it is really hard to see where information comes from. And it is very difficult not to look across the internet and see something that makes sense over here on one side of the spectrum, and then another piece of data from way over here, and try and pull that together. Personally, I worked for a company that manufactured bisphenol A, BPA. And, everybody knows that it is not the best chemical to have around, but it makes a really good lining for different cans to prevent corrosion. So, like, tomatoes are particularly acidic. Well, the biggest voices out there that were criticizing BPA use in commerce were one of the biggest was from certain academicians who were getting grant money to study this phenomenon. So even I don't think anywhere in particular is safe from the impact. I mean, people think industry is so horrible. Well, people from the government are also getting grants. People from academia are also getting grants. So it's really about the transparency in how they publish, publishing where they got their funds from, no matter if you're an academic, government, industry, or whatever, and have that stand up to your peers. And that, to me, that's the only way to kind of combat some of this. But again, you just have to be very careful about your sources. And I've seen it time and time again. And, some of the most challenging parts of my career have been because a non-governmental organization, an NGO, has said, we don't believe what you're saying. And we go back and we looked and we said, hey, maybe there's some merit to this particular point that they're saying, and go back and kind of change our ways. So there's a whole lot of checks and balances in the system, but it's hard. And, people want to be air conditioned. People want their hair to look a certain way or their skin to look a certain way. And those market-driven pressures are awful hard to combat.
Mm. And is it almost kind of like a confirmation bias? So if you're getting funded by a organization and the whole point of your study is to see whether the vaccine or BPA causes health implications or not, you're going to be more likely to look for information that confirms that belief whilst going into the study. Does that play a role in it?
Sometimes, I suppose. But, you first have to start off with your hypothesis and have it be a very clear hypothesis that doesn't change halfway through your study. And do you have the tools available to really answer that question? Because the worst thing that can happen in science is you ask a question and you get an answer, but you don't know what to do with it. You don't know how to fit that into anything else that you might be doing. So, definitely research programs are out to demonstrate something, because you don't get funded if you prove nothing. There is no real journal of negative results, which sometimes can be a problem because, I'm working on a chemical and I want to say, hey, is this an eye irritant? Like, nobody knows. Well, because nobody paid them to publish to say, hey, yeah, it's not an irritant. So it can be really hard in that way. But I would not say that there's necessarily bias like that. Although what I will say is that one of the hardest, I think, pieces of science is epidemiology. Are you familiar with epidemiology?
I've heard of it, but can you define it?
Sure. So epidemiologists study generally human populations or populations of things in the world. So an epidemiologist might go out and say, okay, for COVID treatments, this population is more vulnerable than another. Or an epidemiologist would look at a workplace that has a particular, maybe they're being exposed to really low levels of ozone, which is normally in the air. And they will look and they will design a study to evaluate what are potentially the adverse health effects or beneficial health effects, whatever it happens to be. Human populations, you can't put us in a bottle like you can an animal and just say, see what happens. So those to me are some of the hardest studies to do when we talk about confounding, talk about bias. In the industries I've served, they did a lot of these worker exposure studies in the 40s, the 50s, the 60s. Back then, you were smoking on the job. You weren't wearing gloves. They didn't have good hygiene. So they were eating their lunch right after they had been playing it with X, Y, and Z. And so sometimes using that data at these really super high levels of X, Y, and Z, or combinations of X, Y, and Z, trying to extrapolate that into something meaningful in today's safety culture. They're like, oh, but they got cancer. I know. no, those exposures don't happen anymore in civilized worlds. So again, we have to be careful about the data we have. Is it fit for the purpose that you're looking for? Is it transparent? Do you really understand what was happening? And to me, those are some of the um, hardest sciencey things to do, which is why I'm also not an epidemiologist.
Yeah. And in epidemiology, do the people they study, are they certain demographics as well, like race and age and stuff like that? Or is it?
Definitely consider all of those kinds of things. And there's a number of different kinds of epidemiology studies. So there is a retrospective study where I just have this and I'm going to look backwards at health records or something. You have case control studies. So, like, you see that in a lot of pharma. I have a control person who didn't get the drug. But they are in every way that we can, like this person who does get the drug. So, matching on demographics is really important. The other thing that is becoming more important is looking at marginalized populations. So let's take, for example, if you have a population of women who are gay, or men who are gay, or trans people, because of the other medicines they may be taking, sometimes, especially in the trans community, we really need to understand how to treat them. And so, how do we make sure that we include them in our clinical trials and understand what the differences are so they can be treated well and they can do what they need to do? In the same way, if you think about it, if I had a hysterectomy and they remove my ovary, what does that mean for me not having that extra estrogen? And how would a drug react differently in my body without all of those extra female hormones? So when they start talking about, in my opinion, like DEI and looking at all of these different cohorts, and there's more than one gender, there is more than one way to examine these people, and I'm including myself in these people. Um, and again, we all know that children have different metabolism than someone who's 80. So again, what are the changes and how will they respond? How would my grandmother respond to a medicine at, 95 versus my child who is 15? So looking at all of these other demographics, including Latinos, including African Americans, including, making sure you understand those demographic differences, size, weight, origin, your metabolism status. Um, that's really important.
Yeah. And you've mentioned metabolism and hormonal levels. I'm just wondering how those two factors can affect kind of reactions and maybe detoxification from our bodies. How does that make a difference?
So, the functions of our hormones are not just for sexual maturity. They also affect things like how well you process sugar in your body. So, when you start thinking about hormones, and what else did you mention? Hormones and yes, exactly. When you think of a hormone, you don't always think of things like your thyroid and how your thyroid can be affected by different hormonal levels. So you have to think bigger than just what we traditionally think of as the sex hormones. But again, a faster metabolism or a slower metabolism, there are certain people who have a genetic difference that makes them metabolize certain drugs very, very fast. So if you don't know that, you're going to give them a dose and they're going to need more quickly. So sometimes understanding that how you metabolize fast or slow, especially for certain um, important enzymes in your body, is really good. You got to.
And how do you know if you have a fast or slow metabolism?
That's something you would have to ask your physician about. They can look at the hormones in your body. or they can do, just standard blood tests, looks at thyroid hormones and such, and that can help give you an idea. And again, a full medical history, trying to see where you fit along the spectrum. Are you a smoker? Um, People that are smokers, they have certain enzymes that are induced in their body that are higher to handle and detoxify that particular smoke and the consequences of that cigarette. So, they may respond differently to drugs. It's the same way that if you go on the wagon for 3 months and you take a beer and you're like, oh my gosh, I am so buzzed off of this single beer. It's because the enzymes in your liver that help break down the alcohol, they had been higher because maybe you were drinking more regularly, and then they've dropped down to different levels so that when you have it again, you get drunk faster.
Yeah. And are most enzymes that deal with kind of detoxifying chemicals in our body, are they like mostly found in the liver, or there's some other organs?
Yes. They're mostly found in the liver.
And is that why when someone's maybe an alcoholic, for example, and their liver's damaged, does that cause them to struggle to detoxify chemicals more? And
Oh, yes.
can that be a
Yes.
reason why a lot of people get cancer from alcohol?
So alcohol is a carcinogen. It also can result, overexposure to a pregnant woman can result in developmental reproductive effects in their offspring. But yes, the alcohol in the liver, it gets metabolized by the liver. So you start producing more enzymes that can break down the alcohol. But sometimes that can also cause the production of byproducts that damage your liver more, as well as just in general, your liver's working so hard, and these things are irritants. They can damage parts of your liver, and then your liver starts to try and repair itself. And when you do anything too fast, you can have a mistake. So it's growing too fast. It's growing too fast. It has a mistake, and then you can get a form of liver cancer. I mean, in the most simplest terms. So yes, having a compromised liver is very difficult to. It can be reversed in some cases, but in other cases, it's just going to result in chronic problems, and all of those feed into other consequences.
Yeah. And is alcohol the main culprit for liver damage, or are there some other toxins that can damage the liver just as much?
Oh, there's a ton of things that can damage the liver. Alcohol is probably the most common, but even things like a Tylenol overdose, those kinds of things can damage the liver. I mean, a lot of drugs can target the liver. So yeah, that's a pretty important one. The kidneys are also very important because whenever you get anything into your body, the goal of your body is to make it more water soluble so that it leaves your body. So either as urine, as through the breath you exhale, through your skin, or through feces. So it is those things that are really lipid soluble, like to hang out in your fat, that stick around for a long time. And there are a number of different drugs that kind of can do that, and other chemical agents that sit around in your body for a long time and are very difficult to remove. So if your liver's working hard to make everything more water soluble, break it down to something that can get out through your urine, out through your feces. And also your kidneys are really important for filtering all these agents out and getting them out through your urine. So those two organs are really very important for keeping a healthy body.
And what toxins are the hardest to filter out? You mentioned like lipid soluble ones. Are there any examples that you can think of that are really hard to get out of the body?
I'd have to Google, but like the things like the like PFAS, those forever type chemicals, they like to hide in fat. So those that's why they stay in your body a long time. So that's a good example.
Yeah. And if you have a lower body fat percentage, does that mean you have a lower chance of having those forever chemicals in your body, or does it not really make a
So if
difference?
you have a lower body fat,
Yeah, if you have a lower one. Oh,
yeah.
okay. Ah. And how were these forever chemicals discovered? Because I hear a lot of people talk about them. I'm just wondering where they originated from and what kind of products are they found in nowadays, and what are some of the implications of those forever chemicals?
So, the forever chemicals, fluorinated substances, tend to be really good, and these saturated fluorinated substances have a lot of really good and important uses. For example, they are really good in as heat transfer agents in if you're like making semiconductors or other things where you've got a lot of heat and you want to keep everything, transfer the heat from one thing to another. Those substances, they're really good because they are inert, they don't break down, they are not flammable, so they're really, really good. But that goodness of some of those substances, when it gets out into the atmosphere, means they stick around a long time. They help transfer heat. So what makes them good in one situation makes them bad in another. So a lot of these fluorinated substances were found in different coatings. So they used a lot of them on like pans, like Teflon and such. And so they were used, and either they could have gotten into the water supply, gotten into the air. I'm not exactly sure, but they did. They're out there, and so because they stick around so long, they've been able to be distributed across the globe. And that's why people were like, oh, I found it in a polar bear's liver who's never had a Teflon pan before, blah, blah, blah. So that's, it's just through the natural distribution through air, wind, and whatever. But again, because they don't really degrade, that is the problem.
Yeah. And what can that cause in our bodies? What are the implications of that for our bodies?
The implication is that it can cause disturbances in your endocrine system and in your immune system.
Yeah. Is that
That is not my area of expertise, but, uh, in general, that's what those have been said to affect.
Yeah. You mentioned BPA and ozone earlier. Again, two other toxins or substances that are talked about quite a lot. What are some of the implications of those two chemicals?
Well, ozone um, is really important in our atmosphere. So it's O3, and the problem with ozone is one of the problems, as I understand it in my world, is that it can be an irritant. So if you have sometimes, after a rainstorm, kind of smells interesting, different after a strong rainstorm, and that's the ozone layer being a little higher. That's produced through those storms. In the same way, certain air purifiers, they can kind of give, it's not a smell, but it's just, you tell something's a little different. That's the ozone. And so the problem is sometimes that ozone can cause irritation in the nose and other upper respiratory tract, making other problems that you may have worse. BPA is also said to disrupt the endocrine system. So trying to regulate that and mitigate any of the possible causes. But again, some of these chemicals are really important for other uses, and we haven't found a good alternative.
Mm. Do you think this only solution to getting rid of some of these really useful but sometimes quite dangerous or toxic chemicals is finding a better alternative?
I mean, I think that that's really important. The problem is that, so there's a couple ways to fuel changes, right? One, you ban it. And if you ban it, then you have to come up with an alternative, right? So that's one potential. The other is supporting research and development to try and phase out the ones, and find alternatives as you can go. And I know right now in the United States, we've had a big change in the administration and the focus on science. So I think other countries are going to have to kind of pick up the slack.
Mm. Yeah, I think that's probably necessary. Another few just chemicals that a lot of people seem to be worrying about is toxic mold and mercury. I'm just wondering why and how can you if you know, how can you just like find out whether you have toxic mold, for example, in your bedroom? Because when I was younger, I sometimes had mold on my walls, but how do you know if it's toxic? And same with mercury. Why is mercury bad for us, and where can it be found?
Okay. Well, for the mold issue, the problem isn't necessarily the mold itself. It's the toxins that the mold produces, and they can get into the air, and then that's what can damage your body. So the best way is to call a local company or your health department about your mold issue, potentially take some samples, put it into a jar, a glass jar, an old mayonnaise jar, or, pickle jar or something. And, use that to to save it so that you can have a sample. There are mold remediation companies out there. The problem a lot of times with mold is that it's fueled by the moist, damp environment. So just removing the mold isn't necessarily going to fix the problem. So you got to make sure that they kind of stop the source of that moisture and of the mold. So um, so that's mold. The other question was around what? Mercury. So mercury was used quite a lot in olden times. It was in thermometers. It was used in making hats and such. And so it's gotten into the environment, and it has gotten concentrated in certain species. So certain species of fish have a high mercury concentrations. So, you know, if you do have a broken thermometer in your house, do not take your vacuum cleaner, get some wet, damp towels, put it on top of it. Don't touch it. When I was a kid, you'd had the mercury and you put it in your hand and it would roll around. It was really cool. But the best thing really is to use a damp cloth to wrap it all up and put it into a secondary container, probably like a glass container, and talk to your local municipality to see where you can dispose of it. There's not a lot of just free mercury that you can just, try to avoid. But again, certain fishes, certain other species can concentrate it. So that's why we need public health departments to make sure that they are testing some of these things regularly.
Yeah. I go to the gym most days a week, so I try and have a lot of protein, and that includes for breakfast having a can of skipjack tuna every day. And I'm aware, like you said, certain species of fish are high mercury, and that
Tuna.
includes tuna. Do you think I should be careful about and other people should be careful about the amount of fish like tuna they eat, and maybe avoid eating it daily to avoid that
Well,
mercury?
my guess is that you're getting your tuna from a reputable facility, which has limits on and regularly tests how much mercury is in the fish that you're eating. So that would be the first thing to do, is to check their website and ask the question. Um, I think that the bigger risk is if you went out and had tuna from the ocean every day, or tuna in sushi. I'd be more worried if you had sushi for, tuna sushi for lunch every day than I would if you had tuna from a can,
How come?
because the they're not necessarily testing the amount of mercury or other metals in the fresh caught tuna, because they don't want to give up pieces of that beautiful tuna and send it out and then hold that tuna there while they're testing to make sure that it's low levels. So it's just, so it's just not profitable. Now, maybe they are doing that. But I can't see that happening at my local, you know, fresh caught thing at, my Wegmans or my Whole Foods or something. They're not taking pieces of my fish to do that.
Yeah, yeah. And what can high levels of mercury do to our bodies?
It's worse if you were pregnant, to be honest, because that can affect the fetus. So mercury can interact with the neurological system, your nerves, and so that's where it can cause some problems. So it's a neurotoxin. So again, and that's why they had the Mad Hatter, because in Alice in Wonderland, because the Mad Hatter, the Hatters made hats, and you use mercury, make them pretty, and yeah, that's why a lot of them went mad. Right. Yes. Yes. The same thing with Van Gogh cutting off his ear. A lot of that was from the, they would take the brush, lick it, to get the point, and they'd be ingesting these paints, which had heavy metals in them, and heavy metals tend to interact with your neurological system, and so makes you crazy.
Yeah. So when you say neurological system, does that mean it can potentially pass the blood-brain barrier? Oh,
Yes.
wow.
But it's also that it, interacts with any of the other nerves, like, so affecting your fine motor skills. Your nerves innovate your gut. So being able to eat well and to be able to have your gut work well. Some of these metals also in overabundance can interact with the normal enzymes because there's usually a metal on those essential metal that you need, like cobalt or zinc or magnesium, can displace some of those and so cause different problems in your digestion, in normal functioning of how you are processing food and detoxifying things. So, yeah, it's really important.
Makes you think how many historic people that have known to become crazy, like Van Gogh, was caused by things like mercury, and they just would have never have realized. It's crazy.
No.
Yeah. I was just wondering what jobs get the highest exposure to toxins. What some kind of common jobs that people do that could potentially be dangerous without them realizing?
Oh, without them realizing? Well, um, so in the UK, you have the Health and Safety Executive, the HSC, which is an excellent organization. I've worked with them with regards to several chemicals, and they have a very comprehensive program as well as in the US to look at workplace exposures. And so there's a couple of things that when you think about a workplace and being safe in a workplace that you have to think of. So one are just like general, just physical hazards, noise. Chronic exposure to noise can cause problems with deafness, vibrations. People that like do jackhammers and stuff all day, that can damage your nerves, of course, and your hearing. So you have these kind of physical things and like how you handle materials. So that would be making sure you have the right gloves, the right hearing protection, the right hoods to, if you're working in reactions, that in a plant that they have appropriate capture technology so that, because all plants and facilities are permitted to release a certain amount of X, Y, and Z. So do they have the proper capture there? So in terms of exposures, I mean, they've really cut down significantly over even my career, some of the workplace accidents that they have. So, they have a number of different reporting systems for accidents. So they have like a national registry. So they'll be like, this person, we had a fatality because we had a worker who was cleaning the inside of those, big giant water tank things, and they suffocated. So there's or they became overcome with fumes or something. So anytime that there was a serious injury and it's reportable, so that means that you've missed a day of work or you need something more than like an aspirin, the government gets involved to do an evaluation and evaluate those tasks. So you know, from that, it's hard to say which is kind of the worst and the most dangerous. I will say that mining is still very difficult and has a high injury rate and can be quite dangerous, especially if they're not given the correct gear and safety protocols and training for that. But I would also say that things that are more like home, things you might do in your backyard. So if you like to refinish cars, and you're doing your own spray painting of the cars, you can get some exposures there. Um, to me, it's really thinking about, am I using this in a ventilated area? Actually reading the instructions on back of what you're doing. But when I think of the most overall dangerous jobs, I think of those more as a physical hazard, like the guys out in the middle of the Arctic trying to get all of those crabs, on the, dangerous catch type stuff. Those physical hazards tend to me, for me to be the ones that kind of throw get me worried versus being in a modern facility in the Western world where they are, mandated to wear protective shoes and such.
Yeah, and speaking of kind of modern and Western jobs, like office jobs, for example, what could be some chemicals that people are exposed to that could potentially harm them in offices, maybe from air conditioning or other things like that?
Traditionally, we've had problems with things like a Legionnaire's disease. So that's a bacteria that got into the water and then where it's really moist for the air conditioning. But since there's not a lot of places, as I remember in the UK with air conditioning, that maybe it's not as big of a deal. Um, but overall air quality it is important. There is a lot of research right now on air quality when it comes to the different particulates that get into the air. So through like just airplanes traveling around or dust storm or a volcano erupting, there's certain amount of just general particles that get into the air. And inhaling those can cause problem. A lot of times, the smaller the particle, the more likely it is to get is absorbed into the body, and that tends to result in a lot of cardiovascular problems. So, increased risk of heart attack and or increased issues around breathing, asthma, that sort of thing.
Yeah, and are there actually any ways to, you know, mitigate that or avoid that on a personal level? It seems like if there's a dust storm or a volcanic eruption, like what can we really do about that? Is there much to do?
Well, yeah, keep your windows closed. You know, I know that sometimes masks can be seem silly, but, those do filter out some of the big particles.
Hmm. Yeah. Speaking on farming, actually, I was just wondering how different farming practices can affect the amount of contamination risks or amount of potentially harmful chemicals in our food supply, and which type of farming can cause the most contamination of toxins or bad chemicals to the body.
So that's a bit of a loaded question. Um, you know, we have some of the safest food in the entire globe, in the UK and in the US, and a lot of practices to make sure that you're not getting contamination by E. coli or Listeria, and having those items, those um, protections in place to make sure that there's regular testing of our food supply. Um, in terms of the use of various pesticides and other farming aids like that, there are strict requirements for how you are to apply these and how much you can apply to a particular field, as well as looking at the workers in the field and how best can you protect them. I was actually just reading an article yesterday, which sounds stupid because yesterday was a holiday, and I was reading an article about this, but I was that the highest exposures in some of these migrant workers is actually in their wives and children at home because they would go to work, they come home, they may not take their clothes off quickly. They wash the clothes or they don't wash their hands, and they've gotten some kind of spray on them, and then they carry it into the home through the dust on their shoes and all of those kinds of, so it's a secondary exposure to families. So they have a lot of programs working on trying to educate farmers and making sure that they're using protective gear, that they are using good hygiene when they get home. So take your clothes off outside, take a shower right when you get home, avoid, you know, just eating, wash your hands before you eat. And I know that all seems simple, but it's the kind of stuff that works, especially in more rural areas. So, I personally am not concerned about pesticides and all those, agricultural aids in my food supply. I don't particularly buy organic. Um, I just don't, for me, it's not that I'm willing to take the risk, but I understand how much research has gone into making sure that these products are safe. And so I generally don't worry about it. Um, I would think that I'm not as familiar with how things are in the local farm stands, you'd like to think that maybe they're, you know, I don't use pesticides on my XYZs, but I don't really know. So I'm more likely to wash that stuff more carefully or be more careful about what I might buy from a local food stand. But I'm also not immunocompromised. I'm pretty healthy. So again, I'm not too worried about. Just think about where your food comes from.
Yeah. Do you think it's a bit of an overreaction from the general public then when they kind of worry about these pesticides or, industrial scale farming and stuff?
I don't think that it's necessarily an overreaction from them. I think that there are a lot of media and other third party groups that may have a stake in an alternative, and they believe a lot of what they may read. So, it's all market. So much of our world is market driven. If people want to have something that's organic, well, then okay, you're going to have people that will make it organic. I think that for me, the idea is around sustainable farming, you know, making sure you're growing crops when the right time of year, that not necessarily I'm going to have the most perfect strawberry in the dead of winter in my home, so we want these things as consumers. We want to have beautiful clementines or oranges, in the dead of something. That's not where you get that food. So I think a lot of the blame would really be on us as consumers in terms of driving this need to have food out of season.
Yeah, and maybe if we weren't so perfectionist about how the food looked, there might be less
Agreed.
problems. Yeah.
Yes.
Speaking of organic and like organic farming and organic food, is there really a difference? What is the difference between an organically produced piece of spinach versus a non-organic or non kind of branded organic piece of spinach, for example?
I'm not an expert in that area, but what I can say is that the definition of organic does not mean absolutely no pesticides or herbicides. But to the degree in which it is, I'm not familiar. Um, and I, but I do believe that part of it is in how the land is prepared and maybe what was used previously in that land. So I can't really help you.
Yeah, that's
I
right.
can't on that.
Yeah. About and also herbicides and pesticides, do you think they have a kind of bad rep or are kind of maybe unjustified rep? Because clearly, like we've said so many times already on this show, on this episode, they're clearly useful and they're clearly maybe even necessary to an extent. So why do people have a problem with them, and what negative health implications do herbicides and pesticides potentially have? And yeah.
I think sometimes it's the same as with big pharma. They're all like, oh my gosh, big pharma's making all this money, Monsanto, and I agree that those companies make an awful lot of money. There's also the issue, which you haven't brought up, of the genetically modified organisms, GMOs. Um, that's a whole nother episode, really. But um, I think that in our world right now, you have places that cannot grow food and places that you can grow food. And there has been a tremendous um, economy and logistical nightmare about getting food from one place to the other place and maximizing your yield in one place versus another place. And I think there's a place for herbicides and pesticides and all those kinds of things. I also believe that as over time we have developed food either through, some manipulation of the genes or just through selective breeding to get the kind of attributes that we want in a particular fruit or vegetable. Strawberry, a shelf-stable strawberry that you can transport. Those kinds of things many of those are consumer-driven. I want a strawberry. I want it perfect. I want it sweet. I want it to sit in my refrigerator for 3 weeks until I remember I have these. And that's just kind of the way it is. Um, there are an awful lot of people around the world that don't have enough to eat. I think that smart farming and really thinking about what is grown where, how do we share our wealth, and some of these sustainable farming techniques that are out there could go a long way in these other regions. So I just danced around that one just a little bit.
It just seems to almost being, I don't know, this may be a bit controversial. Like, it sounds like from what we've been discussing, we're almost being slightly ungrateful in a way because, you know, we have so much abundance of food, and it's a lot of the time it seems to be because of these advancements in technology and farming practices. And yeah, there might be some implications to that. But if you live in Los Angeles, for example, you know, they don't produce a lot of their own food. They have to get it from other places. So you need to, you know, kind of innovate to be able to preserve the food and make sure it's not damaged or gone off by the time it reaches these massive cities.
Well, also, and I live near Philadelphia. In Philadelphia, we have what we call food deserts. Have you heard of those? So how can you even get good food, healthy food, in a place that won't deliver there? There's no market for it in terms of, you know, deliver it safely, or there, you can't put a grocery store here and there. There's a certain economics to it as well. So there's a natural turn towards food that is cheap and available, such as from a fast food restaurant. So there's a lot of issues here that go beyond just the quality of food and the quantity of food. It's availability of food and teaching people how to, you know, how to make it and how to eat it and get good protein. So it's very, very complicated. And I mean, I have friends in the ag industry, in the pesticide and herbicide industry, and it is very difficult. And there's so many regulations and this huge data set that you need to be able to get these on the market, and not only just scrutiny from the U.S. government, but from the European government and other worlds, you know, other nations around the world. So there isn't always harmony, because sometimes in maybe Latin America or another country, there is something that is approved there, but not approved here, but they can still import the food sometimes. So it's a much bigger problem. And I think that it really needs a global approach to be able to begin to solve it. And I think, again, a lot of it comes back to sustainable farming and not being greedy to say, I want to, you know, the perfect kumquat, you know, 6 months out of season.
Yeah. Is there a global food organization that kind of could like monitor all of this, or are they separate organizations depending on the continent and country?
There are certain, you know, global, well, each country has their own regulatory framework. They do like to listen to each other. The World Health Organization does a lot of the bringing all of that together.
Yeah. And we won't talk about it too much because you said it'd take an entire episode, but I am curious about genetically modified crops and plants. What are some kind of common maybe misconceptions or myths or criticisms about GM crops from the public that you're aware of?
You know, I don't know. I don't know if sometimes they think it's a Frankenmonster, you know? I don't know. You know, having seeds that have been bred into them a certain resistance for a bug, um, you know, I think that makes people scared. Um, you know, just the idea of maybe how fast something has gone, you know, into market. But again, a lot of these things are pressure, you know, consumer product and the marketplace driven. Um, I don't think that we could feed the world if we didn't have GMOs and we didn't have pesticides and herbicides. Not only that we wouldn't have all the foods we like, but just in general.
Yeah. I mean, there's 8 or 9 billion of us. And like we
It's
said,
a lot.
a lot of people live in food deserts. And how are we
Mhm.
supposed to feed those groups of people if we can't grow the crops? I think,
And on top of that, what about a natural disaster? You know, like in Western United States, in the western part of North Carolina, we had massive floods and hurricane that went through and decimated a whole community, which also meant you decimated a lot of different crops and farms that and livestock that was supporting that community. How do you help them come back too? So, I mean, it's a very big problem. I was on a business trip Oh, I went to Lyon, France on a business trip. It was awful. But I went on this whole wine tasting journey through around Lyon, and it was fantastic. Amazing wines. But I asked the guy who owned this beautiful vineyard, I said, "What have you seen about global warming? How does that make a difference in your life?" He goes, "Well, I used to be able to grow my grapes and have them ripen in whatever it was, maybe it was 90 days or something. I don't remember. Now it only, because of the heat, it only takes 82 days. So, and then I think he also made a lot of ice wine. So ice wine is when the grapes freeze on they're frost and they freeze on the plant. That whole schedule too has screwed up. So when you talk to certain people in certain regions who have generations of farming experience with a particular crop, you talk to them, things are changing for them and they have to figure out a way to survive, to continue making the products that they want, that they love, that the consumers want, in spite of all these other changes in the weather, in the availability of water, crops, farming practices.
Yeah, even I'm originally from Kent, southeast of England, just below London, and we're actually able to grow grapes now and get them ripened. And there's loads of vineyards popping up all over the county. And I guess it's kind of trying to adapt to those
Mhm.
changes. And maybe the farmer in Lyon actually might have to just grow a different type of grape. Obviously, there's a
Exactly.
sentimental value to it as well, but I guess we just have
Mhm.
to adapt. A lot of it is adaptation because it doesn't seem like it's going
Yeah.
to be reversed.
Yeah.
Yeah. Um, I was also wondering about vitamin or vitamin tablets and how effective are they at increasing nutrient intake and how can they be dangerous to our health potentially? Because a lot of people seem to take them, but I've heard some people have had problems with certain types of vitamins.
Yeah. So there's there's two, in my opinion, there's kind of two forms of vitamins. You have your water soluble vitamins and you have your fat soluble vitamins. So your water soluble vitamins, like vitamin C, you can take it as much as you want. When your body has enough, it pees out the rest. Okay. So it doesn't stay in your body, it doesn't concentrate in your body. The ones that are more fat soluble tend to stick around a lot longer in your body and can cause an adverse effect. That's why they don't put iron in children's vitamins because they taste good. And if they take too many iron containing vitamins, they're going to have a problem and they're going to have toxicity and they're going to have to go to the doctor. So we all know that there is certain health benefits to certain substances, and us looking back to the plant world to understand what those could be and how they might be able to improve our health is a great way to think about improving your health. If you can't get them, if we think back evolutionarily, you would get all the vitamins that you needed from the foods that you ate, right? That's why the sailors got rickets because they didn't have enough of the vitamin C. That's why they call them limeys, because if they found if they gave them limes, they could fix it. Or was that scurvy? Scurvy. Yes, sorry. Um, so you have that kind of thing there. What I've seen um, in recent years, so part of my consulting practice that I do, we do food and beverage consulting. So anything that goes into food, anything that goes into beverages has to be approved by, in the US, the FDA, and in the EU by EFSA, European Food Safety Agency. So there is a big push to understand all of these different ingredients and herbs and such that we're talking about. There is a rule that you cannot make a claim on a label if it's a drug-like claim. So, fixes a headache, or, um, you know, lowers your A1C, those kinds of things without a clinical trial, without data to support it. So the problem has been that people are formulating these vitamins and using them as nutraceuticals but they don't necessarily have a lot of long-term data to show how they might harm or how they might interact with another agent and cause some form of toxicity. So that's the problem. Right now there's this big push, for women who are going through menopause to take black cohosh, that it'll reduce your menopausal symptoms and no more hot flashes. Okay, so maybe you start taking the black cohosh and then you're taking a lot of phytoestrogens, which is you find those a lot in the edamame, the soybeans and stuff. And maybe, you don't know all of these, things that are going on in your body, these interactions that can start to damage your liver, start to damage your kidneys, and then you've got bigger problems. So I think what's important is that if you are taking certain vitamins, that you keep a log of what you're taking, ideally with maybe a food log, just to get an idea of what other things you're taking, and talk that over with your primary care physician. Because there may be things in there, again, with what you're already taking in terms of your regular meds, that may not be working well together. And that maybe separately they would be fine.
Yeah. Do you think it's more effective to try and just get as many vitamins as we can from our food, or in this modern age, is it kind of almost impossible to get enough vitamins without taking supplements?
Yes, if you have a varied diet, you very well could be able to get all that you need. But what do you need? Like, are you looking to build, have increased clarity in your brain? Do you feel that you want to, have more protein in your body? Do you feel lethargic? Like, are you having bone pain or muscle pain? You know, all of those kinds of things are good and may be able to be helped through a good diet, through exercise, through, again, a good regimen of drinking enough good water, um, reducing your intake of alcoholic beverages. Um, so, I mean, there's a whole lot to it. I think we all, to a certain extent, want a simple fix, don't we? I don't want a hot flash. Oh, maybe if I just take all these phytoestrogens, I can sleep through the night. But that's not always the case, unfortunately. We are a society that's really driven by instant fixes. I want this right. I want this right now. And unfortunately, that's not really, we're not patient people anymore.
Yeah. Patience is definitely a virtue.
Yeah.
It's not, it's sometimes simple, but it's not always easy, I guess, as well. It's just,
Yeah.
you know, and also if you do the kind of instant gratification or the simple solution that you just Googled without checking the sources, it could actually do more harm than good, like you were describing. Should we be
Exactly.
worried about water? You mentioned water earlier. What can be found in water that could potentially harm us? And how worried should we be about it? And what are some ways of kind of preventing certain chemicals from being ingested from our water?
Well, I think most of our water supplies that we would have, and whoever's listening to this podcast usually shouldn't have a problem. There's regular tests that go on at these water treatment facilities by your water company. It may be more important if you live off of well water, or if you're camping and you want to drink something from there. The bigger concern around some of these other kind of water supplies is the bacteria and the contamination from humans, with E. coli or other forms of bacteria from water contaminated with sludge. And of course, there is still the Flint, Michigan issue around lead in their pipes. Um, so, generally, I'm not that worried. And, us in the kind of Western world and a lot of places will filter, use a Brita filter or some other kind of filtration system in the refrigerator or something to get water that's clean. And so, I'm not worried about water. I know in the United States right now, there is an awful lot of talking about fluorinating water or chlorinating water. And I believe in water fluorination. I believe in water chlorination. Um, but, there's some people that haven't really, I don't think, understand the whole picture. So,
Why don't people believe in fluorination and chlorination of water? What's making them kind of be against that? What's some reasons?
They feel that it can adversely impact the health of the person, that that it could cause different diseases, um, and it is it's a hot issue on the news when it came to the new director of the Health and Human Services cabinet position during the recent administration change.
Yeah, and why don't you think it's a problem, chlorination and fluorination of water?
I think that overall it has the data says that it decreases the amount of cavities, which is a very positive thing, and that it helps to maintain the cleanliness of our water supply in terms of decreasing bacteria and other um, things that can get in there that can make you sick.
Yeah, and we were talking about marketing earlier and demand for products. Do you think a lot of this kind of water contamination topics could be maybe these water filter product companies trying to increase their demand for the product?
Not in this particular case. I think it really just has to do with the personal belief system of the person who's currently the director of Health and Human Services.
Yeah. And we spoke about kind of funding earlier in the episode. And I'm just wondering, when industries fund toxicology studies, how can we maintain public trust in the findings? We mentioned it a bit before, but I
Yep.
want to know kind of more
Yep.
how we can
Sure.
maintain trust.
Sure. So when you do a study for a regulatory agency, you just don't say, I'm going to take 6 rats and 4 pigs and I'm going to do this, this, and this. We have a series of guidelines. The organization, it's OECD, it's in French, but is this organization for cooperation globally. And what they've done is have a whole series of tests that and methodologies and criteria around these tests to ensure that we are conducting them the same around the world, that they have high standards, that there are appropriate interventions for if an animal on your study becomes too ill, and when do you euthanize them. And so it is through these regulations that help us to design studies for regulatory approval, as well as using good laboratory practices to make sure they're done correctly. So this includes that you have a notebook. You write down all the stuff that happens. You have a way to verify that you actually did expose rat number 101 for this many days, and have all of that backup documentation, which is also one of the reasons why these studies can be extraordinarily expensive and complex, because you have to have a certain number of animals. For example, there are developmental reproductive studies where you expose uh, the mother and the father rat for a certain number of days. Then you let them mate, and you're still exposing them for a certain number of days. And then you have the pregnant animals. They're exposed in utero for a certain number of days, and then you take the offspring and you select those out, and then you expose those for a certain number of days. I mean, these studies are in the millions and millions of dollars. So these studies, which are submitted to the different agencies, are reviewed, and we take a look at those, and that's really what we base a lot of our decisions on. So from a transparency standpoint, that's how we do it according to GLP, according to the guideline. The problem tends to be is that um, regulatory agencies are having a hard time accepting some of the alternative methods that we are proposing to reduce the amount of animals that we use. Um, and it's because they're being cautious. So we have to generate what we call a weight of evidence and to show a particular outcome and finding. So, if somebody says to industry or to pharma or whoever it is, hey, we want you to conduct this study and investigate if this is a carcinogen. Okay, and here's the study plan. Okay, fine. That's a lot more difficult now when you can't use that 2-year study and you're trying to develop a study that would replace that 2-year study? How much data, how many times you have to do that to show the agency this new study is better than doing it the old way? And that acceptance by global regulatory authorities, that's very slow because they don't want to make a mistake. So, you know, a lot of times our studies, we will publish them in the open literature in a peer-reviewed journal, so it has that additional scrutiny. Um, you know, the problem, sometimes the problem for me is that if you get, and I'm not picking on academia here, but you get an academician who's looking at something or looking at endpoints that might be unique, that we've never really looked at before, that for a health effect we hadn't considered or whatever. And they're using a method that isn't part of our standard, right, and that the regulatory agencies approve. That's when it can get a little difficult because we are interested in what they're doing. Does that stand up to the rigor? And how do we say, okay, this is a brand new endpoint that we should be looking at? And, because traditionally we don't think of academicians as having the same rigor. I mean, they're investigating stuff. They're doing some really great work. How do you translate some of that basic research into something that a regulatory agency will accept? Because I mentioned earlier, if you ask a question and you don't know the answer, or if you ask a question and the answer you're gonna get doesn't help you, then why ask the question? What do you do with that answer? You know? So, you ask somebody to marry you. If they say no or yes, okay. If they say maybe, what are you supposed to do with that? So maybe you don't don't ask the question. Same kind of thing in science. It's not necessary that you should, but if you don't know what to do with it, how is that going to help? So that's where partnering with academia can sometimes be very helpful. And I will say that a number of the organizations that I've worked with in industry, a lot of them have a research arm, and they're doing some really great and innovative research and working with academicians to bring this out and say, hey, let's try this, see how it works. There's a lot of what we call NAMs, NAMS, which are new approach methodologies. These NAMs are using the in silico computer programming and integrating in vitro studies, test tube studies, with existing data and seeing how we can build a model that can be predictive for toxicity, predictive for certain endpoints so that we can use less animals.
How much can third-party organizations, you mentioned NGOs earlier, kind of like playing devil's advocate in a way, and can they do that during the study, or do they do that once the study's published? Like, how accessible is the methodology of study during the process of the studies, or is it not accessible at all and everyone has to kind of be able to access it once it's published?
Well, the NGOs can be very helpful because I've seen them kind of poke holes in things that we think might have been status quo, and say, no, that's not good enough. And they've actually been working with certain regulatory agencies to try and come up with, what is that weight of evidence for this method to be used? So I find that they can be a partner in certain cases. It really depends on the endpoint and, really what are they trying to accomplish? Along the same lines, we're working with an NGO that is trying to develop a new kind of grain substitute. And that NGO is working with us to try and get their products to market. So not all NGOs are really like, an evil arm of Greenpeace, A lot of them are doing really good work and trying to make measurable change, and they need to get a way to present their things to industry or to the governments so that they can get their products and bring forth change in a slightly different way.
Yeah, and is that different way effective and more effective than it just being one organization doing it? Is it a good thing that they're different organizations that are maybe not necessarily connected?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, there's a bunch of NGO groups that are really focused on reducing animal usage. there are NGO groups out there that are promoting the use of computer technology. There are NGO groups that are working on sustainable farming. So, there's a whole plethora of groups and interests. Some groups are really interested in what can they do in the ocean to improve the quality of the coral reefs, and how do they work with academia? How do they work with the sunscreen manufacturers, or whatever the drilling that's going on nearby, to make sure that that stays a valuable and beautiful and pristine place. So there definitely is a benefit, and you know and a lot of these organizations, they will have toxicologists. They have scientists, real scientists. You just don't have a bunch of wackadoos out there that are spouting off whatever they read. So there's good science being done in these places, and it's just bringing us all together in a forum with regulators, with the NGOs, with academics, with industry representatives, to work together towards that common goal of improving human health and the environment.
Yeah, that's definitely the most important thing, having that as the common goal,
Yeah.
definitely important. Looking into the future, what do you think about Neuralink from a toxicology standpoint? What could be some implications of having a chip connected to your brain, and what toxins could, be exposed if you had that in your brain?
So, um, and the company I work for, we do a number of what we call extractable and leachable studies. So, supposing that you've got a glass vial with a rubber stopper on top, and in that vial is a vaccine. So, what these studies do is they expose that stopper and or the glass or plastic, whatever it's in, to different extreme conditions to see if they can pull out any toxicants out of there. Whatever they pull out, whatever they can fully extract out, or whatever leaches out over time, we do assessments on those chemicals to see, could they harm you or not. So those extractable and leachable studies are very common in pharmaceutical companies, any kind of, for new food contact materials and such. I would expect the same from one of these chips that might go in your brain, that they would, just like any medical device that goes inside of you, that they want to make sure that nothing leaches out of it that's going to make it bad for you. So, from a pure device standpoint, and could it leach stuff? I would assume that as an implantable medical device, that they've done those kinds of assessments. I think that they have a lot of potential, but I'm not really familiar with them as much. I can just say that part of a medical device approval process includes those kinds of studies to make sure that there's nothing residual. It may have been, and I don't know this for sure, but like the silicone breast implants from a long time ago, a lot of those have broken down over time and have released chemicals and have made people sick. So those are the same kinds of studies we would do on those pouches to make sure that they would stand up to the test of jiggle, I don't know, and not be able to leach out anything.
Yeah, you'd definitely, there must be legal requirements for them to do that before
Right, right. For
showing it to the public.
implantables, injectables. I mean, even these kinds of studies, that these extractable and leachable studies, we'll even do, like if you imagine like one of those big bakery mixers with the paddles, those paddles are plastic. They would do an assessment on those plastic paddles to make sure that nothing leaches from that plastic into whatever you're making. So it tends to be pretty rigorous. I wouldn't take it right out of the lab, and I'd hope that they test it for a while in other species, but, don't count me in first.
Yeah, neither. We've mentioned kind of, using computer simulations or maybe even AI in the future. I was wondering if there's any other emerging technologies or methods that excite you most for advancing chemical safety.
Oh, things to advance chemical safe. I think what I like about, improving chemical safety is that at least the US government is trying to be better about identifying components of certain products that we might take for granted. So for things like cosmetics, a lot of times you can just go to your farmer's market and, get some kind of new lip balm or hair balm. There's a big advance in trying to make sure that the cosmetics that are used and sold are safe and that they will, that you understand what's in them. So um, that makes me pretty happy. Um, I am deeply concerned, though, about the mass exodus from the federal regulatory agencies in the U.S. We've lost a tremendous amount of brain power, um, and I don't believe that it will necessarily speed things to market. So, for example, in the US, you have to, if something is not on the market, a chemical is not on the market, you have to tell the government, hey, I want to put this on the market. I want to use it this way, and here's our data. It used to be that those assessments were taking 90 days. Now they're taking 550 days. So, if you're trying to get something to market, you're stalled for a year. So, um, so I'm really worried about that. But in terms of the health and safety, um, I think the better availability of data that we might not have had access to before, and being able to mine that through AI and identify it and share it and catalog it, to me, that's what I need to do my job better, is to know what data's out there and be able to find it quickly, have access to it, and be able to assess it. So, um, other than that, I can't really think too much of, you know, some of these things. We're still trying to make sure we can navigate in this new administration. And we get a lot of questions from the US about, okay, I want to send this to Europe, or should I make this in Europe first? And sometimes reality is you do have to make it abroad first because we're not sure how long it would take to get to market here.
And why has there been such a brain drain or mass exodus of these smart people?
It would be the DOE, the Department of Government Efficiency, thinking that many of these workers are not working to their capacity or are working on things that are not relevant. And so the uncertainty for a lot of people is just, I'm just done. Um, so that's what I think a lot of it is. If you can't, I have colleagues that work at the EPA. If you cannot um, publish your research, if you cannot go to a conference and share your research, if you cannot speak with another scientist about your research, then is it research? It's like the tree that fells in the forest. If nobody is allowed to leave the forest, you can all talk about it there, but it doesn't get out. So that's where it's really been for me. A lot of these career scientists out there are very frustrated, and you know, it's science is different than business. Doesn't mean that they can't coexist, but it is very frustrating because so many of these people really want to do good, really want to, um, have us all be safe and bring products to market and have a lot of pride in their job and their research. And it's not something that's going to happen overnight. So it's very difficult.
Yeah, and how has it affected you specifically?
Oh, I get a lot of calls from friends and colleagues. Do I know any jobs out there? But really, it's worse for my clients who, when I have to tell them, I'm sorry, it's going to take a year and a half to get your product through, they're like, what do you mean? And they're mad at me. And I'm like, it's not my fault, I swear. Um, so that's the hardest part, trying to get these products to market and not being able to do that. So that really, to me, hurts, is counter to, driving innovation. So
Yeah, and it's kind of ironic that the Department of Government Efficiency has actually made it less efficient to do those things.
well, I think that maybe in some areas it's improved efficiency. I tend to think that if you really want to improve something, you ask the people that are there to give you some ideas on how to improve efficiency, um, and that it is really super complex. And again, some of this basic research takes years and decades to really be able to come to fruition. And I'd like to see that still happen in my lifetime, and cures for Alzheimer's drugs, and cures for diabetes. And how can we make you know, get back, cover all those holes in the ozone layer.
Yeah. Well, hopefully it does happen, and this is just a blip.
I hope so. My kids are nervous. I think every young person is a little nervous, but all of our choices, right, that we're making. So part of that choice might be, I'm going to eat local. I'm not going to maybe buy from is what I'm buying reusable? Am I really recycling? Am I, buying clothes that I just get thrown away? And then how does that affect me? Well, what goes into the landfills and how do you break that down and what leaches out of that into the environment? So we've got a long way to go, I think.
What's a common toxicology practice you think needs rethinking, if any?
Say that again?
What's a common toxicology practice you think needs rethinking? You feel needs rethinking?
So there is this theory out there that if you get exposed to a genotoxicant, a mutagen, that you only ever need to be exposed once and you're going to develop cancer. So we've shown that, and we scientists have shown that that's not generally the case. Generally, there's a threshold. So you can be exposed to a little bit of stuff and your body can accommodate that and fix it in most cases. So what I'm hoping over time is that this process where we are able to say there is a threshold for exposure below which you're okay gets better accepted. Because right now, a lot of regulatory agencies assume this one hit, no threshold. And then that makes it very, very difficult sometimes to get products out into market or to get regulations that are reasonable. So the one thing that I'm really hoping that we can improve upon is the data, generating data to support 4 different chemicals. What is that threshold?
Yeah. I didn't actually realize that was the case, that if you had a really bad toxin once, that actually might not have any effect on you in the long term. And how come there is a threshold? Is it because our body's really good at regenerating itself and getting rid of these toxins?
Well, think about alcohol. You can have alcohol, not feel buzzed. You know, you can have exposure to some sun outside and not develop cancer. I mean, your body is built to handle all kinds of toxicants because your body is always making toxicants inside that you are excreting through the breath, through your urine, through your feces, through your pores, formaldehyde, benzene. When you smoke, all those toxins that go in, a lot of those are carcinogens. So this thought that, you only need one cigarette, then you're going to develop cancer is not right. Now, are some people more predisposed to cancer? Yes. But does that mean that necessarily it is that you're going to get it? And some people that never have smoked get lung cancer, that happens. But overall, your body has a certain regenerative, and it's not always the same for every chemical. So trying to figure out what some of those levels are is important.
Yeah, definitely. And it's kind of too much of anything can be bad for you, Yeah. If you had one piece of advice for your 20-year-old self, what would it be?
My 20-year-old self. Well, I was in college and I was very concerned about my future and what was I going to be able to get a job and would I marry? Would I, have a family? And I wish I would have just spent a little more time enjoying kind of being in my 20s and knowing that things were gonna work out. So, I mean, I think I would have just asked for more patience and I would have tried to give them some lottery numbers from today so that I didn't have to worry about paying my mortgage.
Yeah. Yeah, that is a good piece of advice to your 20-year-old self, to be fair.
Yes, yes. And the billion-dollar jackpot that happens in the United States in 1991, that these 6 numbers.
Yeah. I've actually read something somewhere that says when people win the lottery, their baseline of happiness after maybe, I don't know the exact number, but a few weeks or a few months just goes back to baseline, or even more so, like it gets worse. They become less happy.
So I think I don't need the billion-dollar prize. Just give me something less that is not going to turn me into like a celebrity, but enough that I don't have to worry about paying for college here in the US. That's a big deal.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I wouldn't say no, to be honest, either. So yeah.
I agree. I
Um, if
agree.
if listeners can take one action off this episode to reduce toxin risks, what should it or could it be?
I think there's a couple of things. One, read the labels. Two, um, if you are overweight, if you are living a bad lifestyle, excess consumption of X, Y, and Z, do not blame your poor health on all these things that you could have potentially had some control over. I had somebody tell me once, "Oh, I threw out all of my plastic containers and I only use glass." And I was like, "That's wonderful. But one of the biggest causes of cancer is obesity. So it's better if you had the plastic, but put salad in them." So, I mean, that's the raw truth of listening to your body, be healthy, exercise, all those kinds of things, alcohol in moderation, all those other things in moderation. Um, and that's the best thing that you can really do for yourself and for the environment. And just, you know, think about your choices. So again, choose local where you can. You know, be willing to be a little warmer than you wanted to be without the air conditioning. Turn off your lights.
Yeah, all good advice. Dr. Anne Chappelle, ladies and gentlemen, and I absolutely love your work and I learned so much from this episode and I hope the audience learned just as much as I did. What are you currently working on right now?
Oh, I have a number of clients that I'm working with right now to help them to bring their products into Europe. So what am I working on right now? I am working with a number of clients to help them get their products through the EPA. I am doing a lot of coaching and mentoring for younger associates where I work. And I'm trying to follow my own advice by going to the gym more, eating a little more salad with a locally grown tomato.
Brilliant. And where can people go if they want to find some of your work?
So they can go to my website, Chappelle Toxicology Consulting.com, and just look me up on the internet, LinkedIn, internet, all those things.
I'll leave a link to all your stuff in the show notes below for people to check out.
You.
Thank you very
Thank
much for
you.
coming to the show and hopefully
No
see you
problem.
again soon.
Well, let me ask you a question.
Okay.
What are you going to do different
What? For
after our conversation?
after this
You told me what I
conversation?
might be doing. What about
Yeah,
you?
what am I going to do different? That's a good question.
I get to ask a question, right?
Yeah, it is good to ask a question. Probably check the labels and check whether Lidl and Tesco actually check the mercury levels in their tuna cans. I think that was a good idea.
That's a very smart, very, very smart. So
And the rest of the audience should do as well if they're eating tuna or any other food.
exactly. If something doesn't feel right, don't be afraid to ask.
If you got to the end of this podcast video, congratulations, you're ahead of 99% of people. You're curious and you really want to understand the world around you and yourself. So well done. But there's still something missing, isn't there? You're missing connection with like-minded people. You're doing all this alone. You're in the lonely chapter, absorbing content, learning so fast and changing so much that there's not many people around you who are as dedicated to this as you. I know that by the fact that you literally have watched this entire episode, taken notes, and you've really listened and want to implement the things you've learned. And you're just curiously minded. Most people don't even read books. So congratulations for getting to the end of this episode. You still haven't met your tribe, people dedicated to improving themselves and understanding the world around them. If you don't have like-minded friends who understand what you're going through and are interested in self-growth and understanding the world, then you're going to feel quite lonely. And I've definitely felt that many periods of my life over the last half decade or so during my journey. And at times I still do. So this is why I've created Tribe of Outliers. This is for people that watch every podcast episode, that read in their spare time, that go to the gym, that wake up early, work out, and delve into topics covered on the podcast. If that sounds like you're going to be interested in joining my new tribe of outliers. It's basically a private community on Discord that connects you with people into the exact same things as you and helps you make friends with new like-minded people so you can keep growing yourself. We're really going to create a tribe, like a family of like-minded individuals. If you're watching this, you're almost there already, but you just haven't met anyone else like that. We're going to do multiple calls a week, live chats, talk about things we've learned, books we've read, even recommend people to come onto the show, the podcast, and for topics you maybe want me to discuss. You'll be able to spend time with me beyond the podcast and get to know you guys, which is going to be awesome. And also, you're going to find out who's on the show before the episodes come out, and you're going to get episodes 24 hours before anyone else by joining the tribe of outliers, because you're the real ones. You deserve to listen before anyone else because you're actually dedicated. You're not just sitting there consuming the content. You're implementing it. You're learning. You want to improve yourself. And why would you not want to do it with people who are just as similar to you? Surely you'd rather do that with and talk about it with people just as interested in these things as you are. It's always better to make friends and really have a friendship with these like-minded people you might not get in real life. Speaking of in real life, we'll eventually do some in-person meetups when the tribe becomes large enough, but I really want to keep it as small as possible. So it's a tight-knit community where we all know each other and we're into such similar things, because if it gets too big, it becomes less personalized. We only want the real outliers. That's why it's called Tribe of Outliers. We don't want a guy who's just watched one episode and hasn't learned anything from it. No, we want the people that are true outliers, that really care about improving themselves and understanding the world around them, right? So it's going to be a super tight-knit community. You're going to get so many benefits. Meet people who are like you, focus on growth, befriend them, talk to each other, including me, live calls with all of us, and get podcast episodes 24 hours before anyone else, and know which big guests are coming onto the show before anyone else. Click the link in the description and be part of the tribe, become an outlier with us today.